Welcome back to another Genre Art with JB. It's been a minute, right, guys? Well, actually, it's been about a week. So, hope everybody's doing lovely on this rainy afternoon in New York. What I'm doing here is I'm just designing some background characters for this Asimov fan art cover. Basically, it's Beta Durrell on the planet Calgon. And I know that I've spent the last couple of videos sort of going over my um, love of Asimov, right? Today I figured I would just kind of dish on my painting process and sort of talk about some of my other sci-fi influences. One of them being namely Halo, which is where I got this sort of look for this marine here. I found this sweet piece of, I think it's from Halo 3 development art, and I figured, this is a fan art. I'm not selling this, right? So I'm just gonna throw that marine in here, maybe tweak him a little bit, give him a cape or something. I have my reference up here at the top of my layers palette. So basically what I'm doing right now is just kind of going over, and today what I'll do is just paint in a space, and I'll talk a little bit about my sort of experiences with Halo and how I, came about it and discovered it. My first interaction with Halo, I was actually a student way back when at the State University of New York at Oneonta, otherwise known as Stonyanta back in the day. Quite the party school. But at the time, I was really into the Xbox. It was Xbox first generation was a new system at the time. And one of the games was Halo, and I was a big fan of Doom. I used to play the old school Doom games back in the day. And while I was familiar with Wolfenstein 3D and Doom and the various iterations, I wasn't that aware of Halo at the time. I was in my early 20s. And then Halo kind of just burst on the scene, and I was floored. It was such a beautiful looking game, especially at the time, and the concept design was unbelievable. And I was keying in on a few things that I didn't realize was that actually, if you look at the concept design behind Halo, even the Marines here, a lot of this stuff was inspired by the concept movie work of Syd Mead, the great late Syd Mead, famed futurist, automotive designer, and visual storyteller, Syd Mead. So, just had a sip of my coffee there. Basically, Syd Mead is known as one of these guys who pioneered the field of, science, concept design for science fiction, right? He kind of was the grandfather, one of the grandfathers of concept art, him and Ralph McQuarrie, right? And they both got their start. And I go over this in a previous lecture that you can actually watch on my channel. But they both got their start in automotive. Well, in Syd Mead's case, he worked in automotive technology, designing cars specifically for Ford. He was in their biz dev department. And Ralph McQuarrie got his start in working, I believe it was Northrop Grumman, designing aircraft, vehicles for the military, basically. And so these guys sort of took their skill sets in industrial design, and they basically applied that to entertainment art at the time. Lucas needed designs for Star Wars, and Syd Mead was scooped up by Paramount at one point to do designs for designs for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and that kind of launched his career as a movie concept art designer. And these two guys were pioneers in the field. But in any event, Syd Mead was really, a lot of his entertainment art work was done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s up through his death. And he was responsible for designing a lot of the artwork that was in the movie Aliens. He designed the look of the Colonial Marines. He designed the Sulaco, and the guys at Bungie and Microsoft sort of basically took those designs and that he did and sort of tweaked them slightly, and then repurposed them for the Halo video game. So Syd Mead's impact is felt all across entertainment art, and that goes back what I was just that goes back to what I was saying before, where there really is no such thing as stealing. I mean, like, these guys at Microsoft didn't come up with these designs through whole cloth. They were taken from Syd Mead. They were taken from Ralph McQuarrie. They were taken from um, Colin Cantwell, right? These guys, Colin Cantwell is another guy who worked on the Star Wars movies, specifically came up with the design for the X-Wing. And I believe, I'm going to guess, I don't know if he worked under McQuarrie. I know, because I know McQuarrie was the senior concept artist, but he did work for Lucas. He's another guy that's sort of he's an unsung hero, really, in a lot of ways. People don't even know who he is, but what's really cool about Cantwell is he actually follows me on Instagram, and I was floored that someone of his stature would actually want to follow me on Instagram. I thought that was really, really gratifying and really something I'm really thankful to him for, thinking enough of my art that he wants to give me a follow. I mean, naturally I followed him back and, just did my research on him and found out that not only did he design the X-Wing, but he was instrumental in designing a bunch of vehicles for the movie. And I no one even knows who he is really outside of hard stuff. I mean, the Star Wars fandom knows who he is, but when you think of concept art, you think of these titans, like Syd Mead and Ralph McQuarrie. But there's a lot of guys who were in the trenches working under them or working alongside those guys back then. Like Cantwell, who, just did the job well, and they never became superstars from it, but like they made a living at it and they had developed a dedicated fandom from it. And it just goes to show you that there's a lot of hands that go into making these properties. But I thought it was interesting the parallels, right, between Syd and the aesthetic behind the Halo, the excuse me, the Halo games. So I'm actually going to switch it up the brush here. And like I said, what I'm going to do today is just focus on the helmet a little bit. And initially I was doing another design for the character that was going to go in the mid. I'll just show you the mid background here, or the mid foreground. I had another character that I designed that's on a previous layer that I've hidden that, I did it, I digitally painted it, and then I looked at it and I absolutely hated it. And I threw it up on Facebook. And then after I threw it up on Facebook, I was like, this character's just not working with this painting. I'm going to go back and start from square one, which is what you got to do sometimes. You got to be able to kind of chalk up to, you got to be able to sort of not let this work get so precious to you that you're not willing to sort of edit on the fly and make changes. And, at this point, like I'm not on any sort of dire deadline with this. This is a fan art, so I can kind of start from square one here. What I'm doing is I'm laying down some dark tones that I'm going to use the mixer brush to blend with and work. I'm going to work these two colors into each other to create a transition of value from dark to light or dark to lighter. And, I'm making a little sort of crude palette up here, just like I did with Beta. But I'm kind of taking liberties with the design here to, not really stressing things. There is a plane here that comes out. So what I'm going to do is grab a little bit. I don't want that. I'm going to grab a little bit of this top surface here, and I'm going to come out. And got some time cop in the background. go check their channel out. They are kind enough to put their music up here on YouTube, so I want to make sure that I cred the music, cred the band in the video. And like I said, I'll put their info in the cards. Make sure you go check out Time Cop, listen to their stuff. And I'd recommend subscribing. I've been listening to him for a while. I'm not subscribed yet, but I think I'm going to subscribe today. And I'm just going and really popping this, popping these shapes a little bit. This guy sounds like Phil Collins a little bit, but in any event. I like that. I really like that. And I'm just kind of letting my design choices kind of inform, where my values are going to go. And, because I'm changing it from the reference here. The ship has sailed. It's definitely not going to be the same as the reference. Maybe there's some sort of piece that goes in here. Who knows? I can kind of have a little bit of fun with this. I do like this little vent down here that's on either side of her. So I am going to bogart that idea and bring this into my painting here. I also like to work at 60, 70% opacity when I'm dealing with digital paints, right? Take into account perspective. Yep, I don't know what he's got that I don't. Story of my life. Not really, though. I'm actually happily engaged and very much excited about getting married this fall. I guess you could say, though, in high school, that was the story of my life. And then let's bring a little bit of this across here. Get this sweet looking helmet. And then God knows where Syd Mead came up with the idea for a lot of his stuff behind Aliens. There's a book that I want to get. It's called The Movie Art of Syd Mead. And he has a few other books, Century 1 and Century 2, but I really think The Movie Art of Syd Mead would be sort of beneficial to review, because I think it has some of the pieces that were used in Tomorrowland, Disney's Tomorrowland, which is a movie that I definitely want to check out. And I believe that it should be out on Disney Plus now. It's really frustrating. I know when Disney Plus first launched, that was the first movie I wanted to see was Tomorrowland. And like, of course, it's like, this movie will not be out until late 2021 or something like that. I'm like, yeah, of course. But they'll release the live action Mulan, which is like, no one asked for. So basically what I'm doing here is I am sort of, again, just working out the different shapes that make up this Marine's helmet. And then at the end, what I'm going to do is blend in my forms. A lot of these colors are in the earthy end of the spectrum. I'm approaching this as if I was using a Zorn limited palette. And the reasoning there is just, you know, the Zorn palette has a lot of uses, right? It's just a beneficial palette to work with because it gives you that box that you have to play in. And I find that when you work in the limited palette, that's when, you know, you push the bounds of your creativity with regards to painting. It makes your painting stronger. It makes the colors work in a more harmonious fashion. Kind of going in here. And there we go. I rather like that. Although I think what I'm going to do is I am going to keep a little bit of the sort of dark shadows back here. Lighting scheme doesn't make as much sense. Let's go here. It would kind of come out there a little. I'm just following the natural sort of lines that I've already thrown down here. Some spit shines going. And like I said, I'll show you what I did with beta. Right now, I'm just kind of going in and laying in some initial marks that will help me make all these colors pop. And then I'm going to need to fix this perspective over here a little bit. And I'm just coming in. So yeah, I mean, getting back to Halo, my first experience with Halo was in 2001, and then Halo 2 came out, and I was hooked and got really into the mythos and the story. And I don't know if the writers from Halo borrowed from anything else, but basically the story of Halo is that it's kind of like the Crusades in space, which is really cool. It's this this galactic federation of aliens that are religious fanatics launch a holy war against humanity because humanity is supposedly, according to their religion, a light on their gods. According to their religion, humanity is a race of demons. And I just kind of thought that idea was interesting, that there would be not just one race of aliens, but a whole confederation of aliens that would have not just hostile intent towards humanity, but be hell-bent on humanity's destruction because we somehow violated the tenets of their religion. And then through that, you find out that this religion that these aliens followed was actually part of an elaborate cover-up that was orchestrated by the priest race of this particular federation, which is called the Covenant, and that basically the other member species of this federation had been deceived. And it's about this Marine that is initially caught up in the war between humanity and the Covenant, and then ends up kind of helping to expose the priest caste in this federation, right? In the Covenant, exposes the priest race of the Covenant for being frauds, and then kind of tells a story of how humanity fought and won this war ultimately against the Covenant. I mean, it's a very interesting story, and it deals with a lot of interesting themes, but it's packed and it's in the package of this sort of first-person shooter game, which I always thought was very interesting. And it was when I first started realizing that, wow, these stories that they're presenting, these video game stories, are like the real deal now. They're not just, it's not just a paper thin story like it would have been back in the 80s or early 90s. These game development studios are actually putting like cinematics storylines into their games. And I don't know, I'm surprised that they haven't been able to make, I mean, I'm not surprised that they haven't been able to make good video game movies yet, but I feel like that, you know, the problem with adapting video games to movies is that if you're adapting, like, let's say a comic into a movie, there's an airtight story there. It's being consumed not just for its artwork, but for the merits of the story it's trying to tell. And if you're consuming a video game, you make up the story as you go. It's not about the story, it's about immersing yourself in this world. It's sort of like the story Bible for a story, but you're making the story Bible up as you go along. It has nothing to do with character development or plot. I mean, you are the character development, right? The choices you make affect the development of the character. So in that sense, it has to do with character development, but in the sense that, you're sitting there and you're trying to work out how to get from point A to point B, you're not sitting there engaged in like the overall story. The story is just paper thin. It's world building, right? Which is important for an actual story. You need good world building in sci-fi fantasy, but the difference is if you're reading a prose novel or a comic, the story is the core of what you're consuming. The character development is at the core of what you're consuming, and you're not making it up as you go along. You're letting the author unlock your imagination as to what this story looks like visually as you're reading it through the power of words and written language. So in that sense, you know, there's a huge difference when you're adapting video games versus adapting movies. I think people forget that. I think, you know, I had a debate with my friend Ken, he's a comic book artist at DC Comics, and he was like, "Oh, there's plenty of good stories that come out of video games." And I'm like, "Not really though, like especially like the way they initially handled a lot of these adaptations in the 90s. I mean, you go back to the 90s, you had some real stinkers like Double Dragon, the live action Double Dragon. I never even watched that. I saw the trailer. Even back then as a kid, I was like, oh, this looks like it stinks. Mario, I mean, I was young enough when Mario came out where if my parents took me to the theater, I would have wanted to see it, you know. But looking back as an adult, I'm like kind of glad they spared me. The one movie, there's two movies that they've done in the last like 30 years that they've adapted that I've found kind of entertaining. Three actually. The first Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, I found that to be fairly entertaining. A little cheesy, but still, it's kind of had a lot of kick-ass action. Had had a really cool plot, and it kind of reminded me of a modern updated version of Indiana Jones, sort of like The Mummy. But the other two movies were both the 2020 Mortal Kombat and the 1995, the first Mortal Kombat. Admittedly, the first 95 Mortal Kombat is objectively a bad movie, but it's just a lot of fun, and you can tell that the actors are kind of having fun with it. And the guy they got to play Liu Kang for that movie was just off the hook. He was great. But all the other video game movies that have sort of come out since then, horrible. You know, there's that movie with Tara Reid and Christian Slater where they tried doing Alone in the Dark, and they were basing it off the video game instead of the actual H.P. Lovecraft mythos. They were working Lovecraft into it, but you know, it was just like, God, come on. Yeah, just really bad. But in any event, let's see. Kind of going in here. I'm almost getting to that point where I want to blend. And again, if you want to, just to show you, what you want to do is every so often you want to zoom out, see how your figure is working out with the value structure. And the value structure I'm setting up here is pretty good. So I did that with this face. I sort of blended Beta's face using a mixer brush. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And that way it will, and then I'm going to have to blur the edges a little bit, but that way it'll more organically go with the sort of value structures that I have already set up here in the rest of my image. So I am actually going to bring some of this pink probably into it. And I'm not crazy about all that pink, so I'm just gonna take that back a little bit. All right, I rather like that. Let's look at it at actual size. Yeah, I think I want to give a little more shadow to this area down here. Not bad at all. And let's just pop this nose a little. Pop that cheek. Actually, let's not pop that cheek. And I rather like that. So that's sort of, you know, my game plan, right? Just go through here and sort of blend all these forms. Last thing I have to do here is just finish off this area, this strap, this chin strap it's got. She's got rather. And I'm gonna actually cut it now, but I had a great time with you guys today, and I will follow up with another video as I finish this piece up. That's about it. All right, thank you, and have a great day. All right.